Hello, another drawing video tutorial. I'm going to be continuing on with talking about perspective drawing and two-point perspective drawing in particular, and breaking things down into thinking of them into some sort of a box. So, something like that. And or an implied box where there's no real edges, but it helps to think of so many things that are in two-point perspective as box, like even if it's something like a fence that really just seems like a plane, I'm still sort of thinking, okay, this is a really thin box. But and I'm going to be talking about this a little bit about the coffee table that we worked on in class, and several things. So here we go. I'm not going to be talking about like finding specific vanishing points or exactly where the horizon line is, but I am going to be talking about not just the box, well, the box idea, as well as breaking that down even smaller into the individual planes of the box. This I can see to the back plane, but sometimes it's obvious what that plane is, and sometimes if it includes the whole plane, that might just be an implied line like that. And I'm going to be looking at the individual vertical planes. We'll get to that the horizontal ones later. Plenty of things to chew on. And just going to make sure that I'm going to discuss things that might seem sort of obvious, but if you don't take some time to really kind of think about them, you'll run into issues, and you won't know why. But the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that it's sort of clear that not only with all types it might be strong, but in general, when we're talking about perspective, we're talking about things appear bigger as they are when they're closer, and they appear smaller when they are further. And while that might be sort of obvious if you're looking at a fence like this, and these are getting smaller and this distance is getting smaller, it's all in that sort of one direction. But it's also important to think about it, especially with box forms, in a foreground closest to you and moving away, moving straight away from you. And I'm thinking about what is closest. I know that this box is somewhere below my eye level. So I know that the lower the point is, the closer it is to me. So it's going to really help to be able to identify which point, where each of these points falls in a sense of up and down, and knowing which is closer and which is further. And at the same time, knowing that the heights of these edges, these vertical edges, which I like to think of as sticks with ping pong balls on the end, that the one that's closest will appear largest, and the next will be a little bit shorter, the next will be a little bit shorter, and that will be the shortest of all. But just in thinking about moving from foreground to background, that's really important as well. And one of the reasons why that kind of plays in, that may seem obvious when I say that, but when you're drawing, a lot of times something will appear very parallel. These lines are not converging a whole lot, and sometimes you'll be drawing something where they're converging even less. So it's really quite important to understand the relationship in size and measuring just how tall one is compared to another, compared to the others. This one is a good optical illusion that I'm going to talk about in one second. But just to make sure have our brains wrapped around that, I mean, if I have two, going back to some rudimentary geometry sort of stuff, if I have two sticks the exact same height that are next to each other, joined by these lines, those lines will be parallel. These are exactly the same height. That's probably pretty obvious. What starts getting tricky is when it's angling back in perspective. So part of it is closer and part of it is further, so you know in your mind that the thing that's further is going to have to appear smaller, but it sure seems like the lines are parallel. And these, I've tried to make these so this is indeed the same height as this. I've been doing perspective drawing enough to where that's really kind of tricky to do. It's helpful in certain situations, but so I've drawn this so these are indeed parallel, even though they're angling up to the right, but is not how things will visually appear. They will appear as though the closer is taller than the further, and ergo when I join them with these joining lines, perspective lines, they will no longer be exactly parallel, but they'll be converging ever so slightly. And that converging, as we've been sort of seeing, is sometimes so subtle and so far off the page that it can be frustrating to figure out how I draw this perspective stuff. And that is really one of the things behind this video. The idea is to step away from all of that perspective stuff and make sure that we have a good idea of both what's going on, what to expect, as well as just strategies for drawing that don't involve me stressing out about finding the exact vanishing point and the horizon line, etc. So that was a little bit about parallel, and now I'm gonna I did want to get to this image, and back to the really honing in on what is lower and therefore closer, and what is higher and therefore further when things are below eye level. So as I just look at this, to me, I'm looking at this image, this point, my brain is telling me this is lower than this, and it is pretty darn sure that this is lower than this. And what an idiot that you are even asking me or doubting me. But as you look closer, and I have this sheet here to just really help with what is level, and I would do this in the real world being very careful with a pencil and making sure the pencil is really horizontal and raising it up. See, I'm already messing up. Trying to keep it even, lined up exactly. But if you do this really carefully, I think I know of another way to do it. You're going to see that indeed this point is a tiny bit lower than this point. Another way to just sort of double check that is to measure the distance to the edge. And if this is lower, then it should be a tiny bit shorter. Go play with that. Trust me, I've been trying to figure this out for a long time. But mostly that's because what I did first, shouldn't have done that edge thing, was measuring here to test this against these other ones. And clearly that's taller than that one. Clearly it's taller than this one. But in looking at these two, if this was closer, it would appear taller than this. And it actually is a little bit shorter. So anyways, it gets tricky. So give yourself grace and go easy on yourself, and know that it can be tricky, and that these techniques, these strategies are going to help and be important when you're trying to figure out why something doesn't quite look right. In the drawing that I did of the coffee table, I wasn't paying that close of attention and just sort of having fun and going for it and not worrying about drawing it exactly. And you can tell that the way I've drawn it, this one is obviously further up. So if you do that, it's quite possible to do that and still make it, like I said, very believable. Actually, I don't know if I did say that, but yeah, I think I did. But I'm making sure that all the other rules apply appropriately when this is further down than this. So, but back to just sort of thinking about identifying these vertical planes and having a sporting chance of trying to draw them somewhat accurately. I have this technique, and the name is evolving. I think I might be calling it L7RJ now, but I'm basically just imagining letter forms for any sort of the sides, edges of any plane I'm looking at, and it works with a lot of things. Works well with vertical planes in particular. So this being a lowercase r, a capital J, that being a number 7, that being a capital L. So I'm using that, and it helps to sort of quickly judge, compare both the angles of things as well as the relative distance, just by thinking, does this really look like that? And it's a little bit off. But by the time I do that with the 7 and then the J, then I'm honing in on it pretty quickly. And I don't have to get out all that measuring stuff and think about shifting my hands and that sighting measuring stuff I've never made good friends with. But I'll continue. You can use it on the planes, and you can also, oftentimes it helps to think of whatever plane you're looking at in terms of a bounding rectangular frame that is only verticals and horizontals. And using, again, the L7RJ idea, or just really kind of looking at this rectangle and thinking, you know, how does the height compare to the width? And oftentimes you'll draw something in a way where the height and width in your drawing are exactly the opposite of what you're actually trying to draw. So that's another helpful strategy. And that continues on in thinking about these as negative shapes as well. Not just sort of this big rectangle, but thinking about this negative shape and how it is bigger than this negative shape. So I know that my lines are converging appropriately. And there are a lot of times when I'm confused and I will say, okay, time out, and I will air draw. I'll be looking at an edge, an angle, and I will air draw it, and I will, in my mind's eye, create the rectangle that would capture just those 2 points and that angle. And by imagining that rectangle, that is something that your brain doesn't want to believe, at least my brain, and I'm pretty sure your brain won't want to either. But any 2 points, when I'm trying to figure out what's off, I will oftentimes use that technique where I'll sketch, air draw if I'm, regardless, or literally draw on the photo reference. The rectangle that angled line creates. And oftentimes that will give me that, oh, I see what's off. As an example, if you're doing all these sorts of boxes, or just when you're drawing anything and trying to think of it in a box, all those strategies apply, but I find that this one in imagining that rectangle and looking at comparing the height of that rectangle, that will oftentimes, like I said, clarify what's wrong. Part of what's so confusing about perspective drawing is that you're never quite, it's this constant battle in your brain between what's up, what's down, what's further, what's closer, and any and all of these little strategies, and there's others too, I'm sure, can be really helpful. That is the, let's see, no, don't look at that. That's my cheat notes. That's really all I sort of wanted to say about these planes, and I will do some more video and just try to apply those in a way that makes it a little bit clearer to something like this. Maybe I'll get some other reference drawings as well. But check that out. Practice. Make a bunch of boxes and have fun.